Greetings and welcome to this edition of
Positronic episode.
I'm Barry P. Cook, and I'm here to talk to you about the latest episode of Star Trek Strange New Worlds. It was called Under the Cloak of War. And before it began, in the previously on segment, they showed the Discovery Klingons as a point of reference. So I guess they're not trying too hard to make us forget that they ever did that. Anyway, as the episode begins, the Enterprise picks up a Klingon defector turned Federation ambassador on his way to important ambassador stuff. Apparently, this ambassador is notorious for his brutal actions during the Federation Klingon War, in which he was a general. In the opening log, Captain Pike notes that not everyone on the ship fought in the war, but some did, and that the fact that this ambassador is a Klingon could ruffle some feathers, especially since he's the particular Klingon that he is. Just before the ambassador makes his way onto the bridge as part of a tour of the ship, Ortegas is saying some unflattering things about him to Uhura, which he overhears the tail end of as he arrives to the bridge. When the tour gets to the lounge, we find that Spock has been trying to synthesize some Roctacino to offer to the ambassador, but is having trouble getting it just right. So at first it's too cold, and then it's too hot, and it actually burns the ambassador, who says that it's fine because Klingons have a high tolerance for pain. All the same, Pike asks him to go to sickbay, where upon seeing him, the doctor has a PTSD-related panic attack. We then get a flashback to during the Klingon War and the time when Chapel first met Dr. M'Benga when serving together on the front. We also meet the chief medical officer of the outpost that she's assigned to, and he's played by Ron Howard's brother, who famously, of course, was in one of the earliest episodes of the original series. When some wounded beam in, one of them is desperately in need of a major organ regeneration, but the outpost doesn't have an organ regenerator. So in order to save his life, the doctor has Chapel store his pattern in the transporter buffer so that they can keep him alive until the next starship convoy arrives. Back in the present, apparently Pike is under orders to have Klingon war veterans interact with the ambassador, so he asks Chapel and the doctor to attend a dinner in his honor. In another brief flashback, we see Chapel and the doctor working to save the life of a patient and apparently succeeding. Back in the present at the dinner, Chapel and the doctor continue to be put off, to put it mildly, by the ambassador's presence and his celebratory treatment at the hands of the captain and number one, etc. In another flashback, we see an Andorian officer try to recruit the doctor for a mission to take out the general, seeing as apparently the doctor used to be a particularly good infantry soldier, which the doctor declines, at which point the Andorian officer asks him for a supply of Protocol 12, which is the compound that we saw the doctor use a few episodes back when he and Chapel had to fight their way through a bunch of Klingons, which apparently he invented, and which Starfleet at one point replicated en masse for its soldiers, but no longer does. But the doctor declines to provide him with any, even though the Andorian suspects that the doctor still has some. Back at the dinner, Ortegas loses her composure and asks the ambassador about whether or not it's true that he had to kill his own men to escape a particular battle. And while he doesn't answer the question, their interaction continues when Ortegas talks about how the Klingon battle cry, which they could always hear all over the comms during the war, was "Remain Klingon," which we saw in Discovery. And she recites it in Klingon and is clearly visibly upset. Number one orders her to stand down, but she ends up not being able to stand his presence, so she leaves, at which point Nurse Chapel follows her out to see if she needs anything. And the doctor, who is also visibly upset and gripping the arm of his chair, is quietly sent out by the captain to help her do that. On his way out, the ambassador stops him and asks him if he would provide him with a training session in some Klingon martial arts, Klingon judo, that the doctor's been practicing. And the doctor says he'll check his schedule. In another flashback, we see that the soldier whose life the doctor and Chapel saved heads out on a suicide mission to try to take back control of the moon that they're on. Spock tries to comfort an obviously distressed Chapel, but it isn't really helping, and she says that she just needs alone time. In another flashback, we see that the only way the medical team could transport wounded soldiers in to be helped at a particular point was by reconfiguring the transporter, which required purging the pattern of that one soldier that had been stored there, who was waiting to be helped by an organ regenerator on a starship. And when Chapel hesitates to do it, the doctor pushes the button and essentially kills him, prompting Chapel to ask why he did it. And his response was that he did it to save lives, and indeed, multiple casualties then arrive requiring help. Back in the present, the doctor and the ambassador engage in a Klingon judo sparring session, as the ambassador had requested. The doctor gets the ambassador to tell him about when he killed his own men in order to make an escape, and it triggers a flashback to when the doctor killed a Klingon in hand-to-hand combat. Things almost get ugly before the two decide to end their session. The doctor then has another flashback to when a particularly bad event resulted in the deaths of civilians, including children, as well as the Andorian officer and the officer whose life the doctor had saved, the realization of which causes the doctor to decide to take up arms and in fact to use some Protocol 12, which it turns out he does have some of. He gives some to Nurse Chapel as well in case Klingons breach the perimeter of their medical outpost so that she can get out. And then he heads out to kick some ass. The ambassador visits the doctor because he still wants them to get to know each other better. The doctor rebuffs him, but the ambassador doesn't seem to take no for an answer, and the terse conversation finds its way to the doctor admitting that it was he who killed the ambassador's men in pursuit of the ambassador, then a general, as he escaped, and that the general has only been taking credit for it all these years, seemingly because it helped him build credibility as someone who ultimately rejected the Klingon side of the war. Things then escalate, and the doctor ends up killing the ambassador with the same Klingon blade that he used to kill all of his men during the war. Chapel tells the doctor that it was self-defense because she did witness it. And when the captain visits the doctor to confirm that it was, they talk about how Starfleet ideals would have everyone be forgiven and be given a second chance if they seek redemption, which is true against the backdrop of the fact that not everyone always finds their way to be able to forgive absolutely everything. As the episode ends, the doctor records a log entry in which he references one of the medical beds that's intermittently on the fritz, noting that some things cannot fully be repaired, but only managed when they break down, which is obviously a reference to himself. So I thought that this episode was fantastic. I think this is the absolute hands down best episode of the season. It was reminiscent to me of previous episodes of Star Trek where people are dealing with long held grudges and long held pain that they just can't seem to get past. Episodes like Duet from Deep Space Nine, where Kira has to confront her abject hatred of all Cardassians. Now, in the end, she gets past that and she has a change of heart as it regards judging all Cardassians by the actions of those who did bad things. But the depiction of her struggle to let go of hatred is relevant here because that's what the doctor is struggling with. That's what he has to manage when, things come up. And so I thought that it, was a good parallel to that episode. And there have been, other episodes throughout Star Trek where old prejudices are hard for people to give up. Captain Kirk, for example, who hated Klingons for numerous reasons, including having killed his son, for which he says in Star Trek VI he'll never be able to forgive the Klingons. There again, he ultimately does, and the doctor ultimately may as well, but the point is that there's a struggle. And, we've also had episodes of Star Trek where people are dealing with PTSD. And those episodes have been very good as well. And I thought this one was. I thought this was a tour de force for the actor who plays Mbenga. I thought it was almost as much of a tour de force for Chapel, who, alongside the doctor, goes through some serious stuff in the war, and you can feel, their pain. You can feel how they're having difficulty. The same with Ortegas. And I think, at the end, what we get is a question about redemption. Is it possible for people to redeem themselves? And I think, from a certain point of view, the general may have in fact done that, or at least was working towards doing it and may have deserved some space in which to do that. But at the same time, not everybody is able to forgive, and they struggle, even though they want to be able to, perhaps. And, I think that this was just an excellent exploration of the human condition, which is what Star Trek is supposed to be. I wish they had spent more time in both seasons of this show making more episodes like this and had left out, episodes like Charades, which, had its moments and which had some heart, but which are just really not all that great. Because, like other episodes of Trek before it, it examined how people are affected by the horrors of war and how forgiveness is sometimes difficult and how recovery from PTSD is very difficult. And I just thought it was fantastic. I thought everybody did a good job. I think this is one of the best episodes of all of Star Trek. And I really wish they would do more episodes like this. And, you know, to anyone who's tempted to, and there are a lot of people on Facebook and on YouTube, it's not any one person that I've talked to, it's a lot of people who say that, too much of modern Star Trek is about people's feelings and they want to see a space adventure. Well, those days are long over and they long have been over. Next Gen was not a space adventure, it was an examination of the human condition, as was Deep Space Nine. Voyager 2 and Enterprise, but both of those shows did have more space adventure, I think, than the other two. This show is an examination of the human condition. Sometimes they do a great job of it, other times they don't. But this is one of the times where they did a great job of it. This was just an excellent episode of television in general. It was excellent Star Trek, and I thought they did great character stuff. It just was really, really good. And it does speak to the human condition in a very valuable way. But I don't want to ramble on and repeat myself too much, so I'm going to get out of here. But I'll be back to review the next episode, the musical episode, shortly after it's released. Until I return, I wish you peace and long life.